Okay, let's now take a look at what's providing this functionality, the login form that we see here, and what's going on behind the scenes when we do actually log into our account here. And we'll head back to VS Code and let's close this stuff down, and we're going to take a look at the Pages folder that's provided for us by Identity. It does provide us with a user interface, as we've seen, so that we can use that to log in users. And if we open the account where this functionality is, we've got a login page effectively and the logout page. And we've seen both of those. We've seen the logout page where it asks us if we're sure we want to log out, and we've seen the login page where we complete our username and password and log in. Now, what this uses to return that view to the client is Razor Pages. And I confess, I'm not a fan of Razor Pages. And what we have is a CS HTML file, which effectively is a mixture of a bit of C# code and HTML. And then we have a code behind file that provides the functionality for that view. And let's just go take a look at what's going on inside here in terms of the HTML and the code behind. Now, inside the code behind file for the login page, we have a lot of things being injected into this. We've got our user manager. We use that to create and get users from our database. We've got a sign in manager, and predictably that's used to help us sign into our application, and it compares the username and password, etc., and confirms that those are accurate, and then it lets us log in. And we have this Identity Server Interaction Service. If we go and take a look at the definition, then we can see this provides services to be used by the user interface to communicate with Identity Server. And we've got a bunch of methods inside here to do various things. Okay, and we also have an event service and authentication scheme provider and identity provider store. So quite a few things going on in this login page. And let's go take a look. So we've got a view model and we've got an input model. And if we take a look at the input model, then this provides the properties that the user provides in the login form and is bound to the login page. So we've got our username, password, remember login, the return URL, as in where has the user come from before they were redirected to that login page, and also a string for the button as well. And if we go further down and take a look at what happens when the login page is first requested, then we provide the return URL as an argument, and it's going to get that from the query string, because if I take a look at the browser, then we have the return URL in the query string, and that's provided as an argument that we see inside our login page. And then we build the model async with the return URL, check to see if the view is for external logins only. Two types of logins for Identity Server: a local login, which is the one that we're going to look at, and if we had Google authentication, for example, or Facebook authentication, then that would be provided on this page as well on the right hand side. But because I removed the Google account functionality, that's no longer here. Otherwise you would see that as well. And then we have the action of the onPost. When the user submits the form, then this code is going to be executed. So first of all, we check to see if we're in the context of an authorization request. We check to see if the user clicked the cancel button. If we take a look at the index.cshtml, then the button itself has a value of either login or cancel. And in this case, if the button value is not equal to login, then that means the user clicked the cancel button, and then action is taken to redirect the user effectively back to the home page, but there's a few other checks inside here as well. But if the login button is clicked and the model state is valid and they've passed validation, then we attempt to sign the user using their username and password and the other information inside here as well. And if the result succeeds, then effectively we get the user from the user manager, and then we raise an event to say that it was a user login success event. And then if the context is not equal to null, that means we have a return URL and we can return them back to where they came from. Okay, and there's a few other things going on in here as well, but it's effectively just using the user manager and sign in manager to get the user actually logged in. And if we take a look at the index.cshtml, well, we've got some lovely HTML mixed in with .NET functionality here to take the properties from the fields in that form, and a couple of buttons to actually log the user in as well. If we did have any external providers, then this HTML would be displayed and we'd see that on the right hand side. Now what we don't actually have inside identity in this template is anything to register a new user. And we do want users to be able to register to Identity Server so that we can use those accounts, or so that we can accept new users into our application, of course. And that, unfortunately, means that we're going to need to create that ourselves, and we're going to have to get our hands dirty with Razor Pages to do so. And we'll take a look at how we can do that in the next lesson. Okay, so we're going to let users be able to register to Identity Server, and once they have done so, we'll be able to use that account to log in to Identity Server. So let's just close these pages down. So inside the account folder, just right click and we're going to add a new folder called Register. And inside this Register folder, we're going to create one of these things called a Razor page. So we're going to select this one, and it just created it based on the name of the folder. Not quite what I'm looking for. So I'm going to rename this Register, and I'm going to stick with what they've used inside here. I'm going to call the starting page Index rather than Register. So I'm just going to rename this to index.cshtml, and that also renames the code behind file conveniently. And then we're going to make some changes inside here. So the namespace it's tried to give us is myapp.namespace. And if we take a look at what's being used for the login one, then we're going to go for the similar kind of namespace to what they've used there for consistency. I'm sure everything would work fine if we used a different approach, but I'm going to go for this, but instead of login, this is going to be register. And for the class here, instead of register model, it's just going to be called index, to match the name of the file that we've just changed. And it's complaining because I've used a semicolon there at the end. Okay, that's better. And let's go over to the index.cshtml, and we'll also update the namespace inside here to match what we've used inside the code behind class as well. And we don't need the @ followed by the empty curly brackets. And I've got a complaint, and it's saying identity service pages register, but I need to give the index as well to list the name of the class that we've created, because the model effectively represents what's going on inside here, and the page, this page attribute, enables us to route to the register folder and what's inside it externally. And we'll see this very soon. So let's see what we can borrow from what's already been created in the login class. And we'll need the validation summary, so I'm going to copy that into my clipboard and go back to the register, and I'll create a div, and I'll just paste in what we have there as the first thing inside here. And then I'm going to create a div with a class of row and another div with a class of col-6 and say offset-3. Now these pages are using Bootstrap for its styling, and these are just Bootstrap classes I'm using inside here. We're not going to do much in terms of customization of how these pages look. We're largely going to leave them intact. And when a user does come into our client application eventually, they're going to be redirected to Identity Server. So this is the view they're going to be presented with when they do log in. So it's going to have a different look and feel to our application. But that's because we're using Identity Server as a single sign-on solution for this application. And it would be the equivalent if we provided a Facebook login, for example. Then they would be redirected to a Facebook branded page to actually complete the login process, because it's something outside of their application. And that's going to be the same for us here as well. We're going to be using Identity Server to provide that login functionality. So inside the div here, let's create another div with a class of card, and then another div with a class of card-header. And inside here, we'll just have an h2 and say register. And below the card header, we'll have a div with a class of card-body. And we'll just say form goes here. And what we'll do is, to allow the users to get to this register page, is we'll add a link inside our login page. And let's scroll down inside the login index.cshtml, and just above the buttons here, we're going to add an A tag. And we don't need the href. And we'll give it a class equal to pb-2 for padding on the bottom, and display block, so d-block. And we're going to have this as an ASP page, and this is how we provide the link so that when someone clicks on this A tag, they're taken to our register page. And we need to go to /register/index. And we need to go up a level because this is our login page, so we need to go up into the account folder and then down into the register folder. And we'll also pass through the return URL, so that's going to be passed backwards and forwards between our login and our register page. So we'll have an ASP root ... and we'll specify return URL equals, and we'll say at, or quotation marks, and we'll say at model.input.return URL. And inside this A tag, we'll just say new user question mark register here. And if we go and take a look at our browser, if I refresh this page, then I don't see the new link that we've just added to our login page. And if I go back to Identity Server and click here, do I see it? No. Okay, so we're going to need to restart Identity Server so that that change has been picked up. And I'll use .NET Watch, and hot reload really doesn't do very much for us, it seems, because that change we've just made to the login page, well, that doesn't show up. So let's go take a look. And if I go back to Identity Server and refresh the page and click here, now we see the link to go to our register page, but if I click on this, nothing happens. Why is that? Well, not surprisingly, by default, all of these pages require authentication inside Identity Server. Obviously, in our login and register pages, then we need to allow anonymous access so that an anonymous user is able to actually register. So what we add inside of the code behind file, the index.cshtml.cs, is we need to add a couple of attributes. And we'll need to enable security headers, and we need to enable allow anonymous. And these security headers, if we just go to the definition, these just provide additional response headers to what's returned to the client for extra security about what is being returned. Content security policies and X-frame options and content type options as well. So we just add those by default because these are provided by Identity Server already. And of course, using this will make our request and response a little bit more secure. So now we have this in place, what we should find at, if we do click on new user register here, this time we are taken to our register page. So now we can see the routing functionality is indeed working. So now we've got to that stage, in the next lesson we'll continue creating our register form.